Good afternoon. My name is Mwangi Kemenyi. I am a senior fellow here at Brookings and also the director of the Africa Growth Initiative. And I would like to take this opportunity to welcome you all to this event. And also would like to welcome those who are viewing us, webcast viewers. And I would like to encourage them to join the conversation on Twitter using hashtag Kenya Economy. Just would like to note that we are very pleased to be organizing this event. This is organized in collaboration with the Corporate Council on Africa, which is here in DC, and I'm very happy to be doing this with Mr. Stephen Hayes, who will be talking later on. This event is focusing on the Kenyan economy, particularly looking at where the economy is and where it's going. So which we think is a very important country to focus on, particularly in the East African region, being sort of the anchor economy in that part. Just a few notes that this is a public event, meaning that it's recorded. So whatever you say, it's on record and it will be posted on the Brookings site. So don't say that you didn't know you are being recorded. The Africa Growth Initiative here at Brookings seeks to highlight issues of importance to the African continent, particularly issues of economy. Of course, we know there are a lot of other intervening factors like security, but we like to highlight these issues of about Africa, particularly also looking at the changing dynamics in that continent and what it means to other people, to investors, because we think it's a time when the world needs to look at Africa in a different light to see what's going on and the opportunities that the continent presents. And Kenya is one of those countries we think that actually has a lot to offer for the Africans and also Americans. And so we look forward to this invest. And again, I'm happy, again, Kenya being my country also to be the point, the country of focus today. We had the Ghana recently, and we hope to continue doing that. We work with think tank partners in Africa, and today we are working with colleagues at the Kenya Institute for Public Policy Research and Analysis in Kenya, who are also AGI's partners, and we have several other partners. And we would like to continue doing this type of discussion so that we can inform, provide better information about what's happening in the continent. So without taking so much time, I would like to go straight to introductions, and I'll try to be brief in terms of, well, the bios are a bit long, but and most of these people. I'll start with Stephen Hayes, who is a co-organizer, whose organization is a co-organizer. He is seated here. He will be coming front, but we thought that because there is a short presentation, 10-minute presentation, he sits there. In his 14-year tenure as president, Stephen has led CCA to become fully engaged in most political and economic issues affecting commerce between the US and Africa. Before coming to CCA, he was engaged in the international non-profit sector, including key positions in some of the world's largest international NGOs, such as World Alliance of YMCA in Geneva, Switzerland, and world's largest student exchange organization, AFS International. In 1985, Hayes founded the American Center for International Leadership, which was funded by the Rockefeller Brothers Foundation, Ford Foundation, and others. Hayes has received numerous awards for his work, including the 2008 Ron Brown Award for International Leadership, the best honor given by the U.S. Department of Commerce. Welcome, Steve. Steve was supposed to be heading to Kenya, but he has other issues for another event. Then I'll introduce my colleagues. I'll start with John Omiti. John Omiti is the executive director. He will also be here, and he will be speaking next. Dr. Miti is involved in providing technical guidance and capacity building on policy and strategy formulation to the Kenyan government and other stakeholders, with the overall aim of contributing to the achievement of national development goals. Prior to joining KIPPRA, he was Senior Research Fellow at the Institute of Policy Analysis and Research, IPA, in Nairobi, postdoctoral research fellow with the International Crop Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics, a member of the World Bank and a SIGA, and worked with the Kenya Civil Service. Dr. Meet has published widely in the free journals and books. His research interests are in public policy with a focus on agricultural transformation, food security, regional trade, and many other things. So I will not finish the whole bio. And he will be coming here to say just a few words about the Institute. Dr. Joseph Kerr will start by presenting, holds a PhD and MA in economics from University of Connecticut and University of Missouri, respectively. He holds a Juris Doctorate in law with specialty on competition law and international trade from the University of Iowa College of Law. Dr. Kerr's research interests are in law and economics, and he has been published in reputable journals such as American Law and Economic Review, Journal of Cooperative Economics. Prior to joining KIPPRA, he was a faculty member at Penn State in Pennsylvania. So again, thank you very much and welcome. Before the panel comes, I'll ask John to make a few remarks on the Institute, then invite Joe to join.
Good afternoon. Excuse me. Thank you for honoring the invitation from AGI to grace this occasion where we will be presenting our report on the Kenya economy. I'll briefly say something about KIPPRA for those who don't know KIPPRA. KIPPRA stands for Kenya Institute for Public Policy, Research and Analysis. It's a semi-autonomous think tank based in Nairobi, where we operate under an act of parliament to protect our autonomy. We have 4 mandate areas to work on. One is to conduct public policy research in various areas of social and economic research, such as macroeconomics, agriculture, private sector, infrastructure, social sector, education and health, and governance. The overall aim of this research that we conduct is aimed at improving Kenya's medium-term and long-term development goals. The second mandate that we are required by law is to conduct capacity building for government and the private sector in areas of policy. So we train young economists, political scientists, so that they can also take over from us in the same areas. We are governed by a board. The board is drawn from 3 main areas: government, academia, like universities, and private sector. We are funded mainly by 3 sources of. One is the government of Kenya, second is the private sector, and international organizations. Our annual budget is just a few $1 million, depending on the year. It can be between $4 and $6 million. The report that we are going to present to you today is the 6th in our series. Now, this one focuses on an area that our colleagues are going to talk about. The Kenya government, or the people of Kenya, decided about 2 years ago to have a new constitution. That constitution sets two tiers of government. We have a national government and a county government. So our focus this year is how to attract investments in the counties. So we're one of the 6 think tanks, as Professor Kimeni mentioned. We have other think tanks we are associated with Brookings, based in South Africa, Uganda, Ghana, Nigeria, and Senegal. So our last mandate, so the third mandate area is to network and partnership. That's why we have this linkage with Brookings. And then the last mandate area is to make the kind of work we research on to be known through dissemination. So our function this afternoon is to disseminate what we have been researching the last 1 year. And for your information, where the institute I lead, Mwangi Kimenyi was the founding director. I'm the 4th director down the line. Ladies and gentlemen, I now invite my colleague, Professor Joseph Kea, to present the report. Thank you.
Good. Once again, my name is Joseph Kea, and I'm a principal policy analyst at KIPPRA. And before I dive into my presentation, let me take this moment, thank you all for coming, and to tell you how delighted I am to be here this afternoon to share with you briefly the brief overview of the Kenyan economy. Now, let me give you briefly on the outline that I'll be covering this afternoon. First of all is to, I know some of you have a very little information about Kenya, so I want to try to put this presentation in some historical context. Then I'll talk a little bit of the trends, economic drivers, emerging challenges, as well as new development. There are two distinct phases when you look at the Kenyan economy. You have the post-independence, and main characteristic of these distinct phase was that we inherited a centralized government from the British with a single-party system. Obviously, that led to stagnation of economic performance. We had 7% in 1986, then that turned to negative 2% in 2002. Obviously, these triggered some kind of demand for democratic process that led to, or that gave birth to multi-party democracy in 1992. Shortly following that, about 10 years later, we were able to consolidate our democracy and elected a democratic government that improved the economic performance as well as developed some economic development blueprint that improved the GDP on an average of 6% between 2002 to 2007. Obviously, this didn't last very long. I'm sure you're all aware of what happened in 2004. We had what we call the post-election violence that slowed the growth. And obviously, this also led to electoral anxiety that led to 2012 to 2013. What I would like to do in this slide is basically to bring to your attention some of the sectorial contribution that basically made contributed the biggest chunk of the economy. And as you can see, the marginal contribution of these sectors, with the exception of agriculture and forestry, all these contributions were negative. The big message I'd like to point to you here that you can see agriculture had a positive marginal contribution and still remain the major important mainstay of the Kenyan economy that provide opportunity for private investment. The other slide, there are about 3 statistics that I'd like to draw to your attention to. The first one is population growth. As you can see, it remains quite high. Obviously, the projections of this number again demonstrate that this is a problem that we need to deal with. GDP growth, as you can see, those numbers seem to point a positive picture of an economy on a strong recovery, with this year projected growth to be 6.3%, as well as the next year growth being around 7%. And finally, poverty remains an issue. As you can see, some of these statistics, we have been stuck to 50%. This is notwithstanding, some, 50 years record of government commitment to try to combat poverty. The other key economic drivers that I would also like to share with you, you had, very stable macroeconomics. One of the things that I think Kenya has done very successfully is to conduct an effective monetary policy that have been able to tame inflation to a single digit, as well as ensuring stable exchange rate. Information communication technology is another area that has been very, very critical. The promotion of competition within the telecommunication sectors has resulted to development of IC infrastructure, as well as innovation that triggered the revolutionary mobile money transfer, popularly known as M-Pesa. There is also the remittances, which I think is a single foreign currency earner as we speak. Tea and horticulture sector has also been very important, as well as regional integration. Obviously, you all know that Kenya is a financial hub, as well as the gateway of East Africa. And obviously that has contributed to improve trade within these region partners. And this had also been well complemented by the foreign policy that the government had been pursuing based on peace and economic diplomacy. Obviously, I have painted a very rosy picture, and I might say, notwithstanding this very optimistic economic outlook, there are some challenges that the government is trying to address. One of them being the fiscal deficit that is being driven by the wage bill. Obviously, as we speak, the wage bill is about 50% of our total budget, which is quite unsustainable. Debt or public debt is increasing, as well as the trade. We've been running a trade deficit for quite some time. The macro issues like security, both international as well as regional. A case in point is South Sudan as well as Somalia. We have made a serious challenge with youth unemployment. As you might be aware that our population is very young. I think between 35 years old and below constitute about 70%. There is also the climate change that has really serious implications on food security. There are new development that seems to provide some opportunities and likely to structurally change the economy. and and one of them is the new constitution. And basically, what the new constitution has done is to create, more accountability. If I can put it a little bit more in a more succinct way, our constitution is like tsunami in making. The difference is tsunamis are random. This one we design, and it's very profound in terms of the likely impact to the economy. Obviously, the key thing I'd like to underscore here is to show you that the new constitution has improved political representation, but at the same time, it has really increased the size of the government. Let me give you a sobering statistic. We have about 416 members of parliament, we call the National Assembly, and Senate, representing about 42 million people. Benchmark that against the US case, where you have about 35 million American citizens being represented by between 527, 28 members of Congress and Senate. So the only thing you can draw here is that Kenyan case we have been overrepresented, and obviously this has come with a huge cost. There are county government that the Constitution has created, and obviously these county government are supposed to be the centers of development as well as investment. They provide competition investment because each county is trying to attract investment, more likely to improve the investment climate, and also provide opportunities of domestic and international investment. Thank you all. I'll stop there. And in case there's any one of you who need more information, I'm happy to provide that with my colleague. Let me give one more minute. There's one slide that I forgot to really mention, which I think is very, very important. There will be a discussion tomorrow on oil and gas, but this is one area that I think we've been very lucky that we've discovered oil and gas. Obviously, these will probably create or some resources for investment in priority areas like agriculture and infrastructure, and more likely to reduce cost of doing business, and particularly energy, and is provide new investment, in terms of value addition and probably diversification. Obviously, there's a need of caution. There's, as we have learned from resource-rich countries, there's oil costs as well as Dutch disease that somehow, as a country, we have to be very cautious about and make sure that we're able to avoid that. So thank you again.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. It's quite difficult to, of course, cover all the issues within a short time, but those are the highlights. And I guess what I would add is that, as I mentioned before, the Kenyan economy is actually the largest within the East African community. And so it's like an anchor economy within that region. And for the United States, there have been quite a big interest in looking at even relationships between not just the countries, but also trade with the community. So that's quite an important. I'm going to ask Stephen to make a few comments, then we'll have a few discussion here before I open it up. Stephen?
Good morning. because this is on webinar, I just take 1 minute or so to talk about what the Corporate Council on Africa is, particularly in context of this report. We have roughly, I guess the official number as of today is 176 companies. Visa, FedEx have just joined CCA. We are 4 years of consecutive growth, which all indicates that there's a strong, growing interest in Africa. That membership does represent about 85 to 90% of all current U.S. Private investment in Africa, and I anticipate we will continue to grow. What we've also done is begin to add African countries and certainly African board members. We hope to be able to announce within 2 weeks a very key Kenyan business leader, I would say young business leader, and from Kenya as part of the board as well, but Dangote, Tony Elmelu, Jabu Mabuza of South Africa, who's the chair of Telcom, are all members of the Corporate Council on Africa. So what we're trying to do is, the strategy is to link business to business, African business leaders to U.S. business leaders, because I think ultimately any investment, which was noted as a key to this report, is going to have to come through partnerships. And so particularly indigenous partnerships, so that's where we're working. The report, I think, was beyond excellent. I was impressed by the thoroughness. I was also impressed by the candor. I think that you may feel that Mr. Kea may feel that it was a rosy report. Certainly, I don't feel that the overall economic report was as rosy as it was factual and really addressing some of the key challenges as well. I thought it was very transparent. I also thought it was very holistic in its integration of that you can't do economic development without good governance and so forth, and health systems and so forth. So I think the report was very integrated. I would encourage everyone to look at the full report, because I don't think the synopsis does it. The abridged version does justice to the depth of thinking that goes into that report. It was just really exceptional. The issues I would say that I got out of it, and again as a manager, and what I said last time, and when we were doing the same thing for Ghana, it's okay to look at what's good, but I think that where you really grow is understanding what's not working well and address those issues. And I think the report, in fact, does address those issues very comprehensively. Certainly, investment is seen as a key driver to Kenyan development, but there's also a note that it's not going to happen unless there's a considerable amount of capacity building throughout the nation. Capacity building in terms of entrepreneurship. Certainly the education system is a weak link, although regionally it's still ahead of many other countries, but it's an issue. Social cohesion is also an issue in Kenya, as it is in any number of countries, I would say, including the United States. And they also address the need for significant structural change. If there is one criticism of the report, and again, I'm very, very high on this, is that type of structural change needs to be explained more, what really needs to be addressed. There's also the talk about the need for a coherent legal and policy framework. You can have good laws, but those laws need to be enacted evenly and across the board. Again, it was talked about deepening structural reforms, but those reforms, I think, needed to be spelled out a bit more. The per capita growth level is low, which still indicates not a significant move from poverty overall, and I think the Achilles heel is the population growth, and particularly high youth unemployment. It is going to be, I think that's an extraordinarily vulnerable point that really has to be addressed through education, has to be through capacity building. Those need to be major priorities. The report did note a poor performance in rule of law and corruption, but again, in the context of the region, Kenya is showing improvement. So those were some of the points that I picked up that I think that if I, as an investor, looking at, and I'm looking at long-term investment, and I think we really have to, from the U.S. side and from any other point, I think we need to think of long-term investment as also a means of developing the country and then also protecting the investment climate. So I don't think any company should come in to look and be rapacious. We talked about oil being a blessing. I hope that proves to be the case. It hasn't been so in many other areas. It does add a lot to the economy and real numbers, but in terms of distribution of wealth, and even in Ghana so far, it hasn't been the stimulus that one might hope for at times, many times throughout. So I think those are the issues that, I mean, there's others, and again, I want to say this was an extraordinarily good report in my view. I haven't read the sectoral points by points as much as I would like to, but I think the report throughout is just one outstanding piece of research. It's more comprehensible than most U.S. government documents, frankly. So I think it's very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. That's very good. Thank you so much for those comments. I'm going to, before we open to the floor, I'm going to ask one question, and I'm going to ask my colleagues from Kenya with my former institution. And okay, so very good, as Stephen says about this report. I think what worries me, if you look at the poverty statistics, as Stephen just mentioned, you are getting this growth, and you are getting just marginal, literally leaving the population at 49% of the poor. So I would like to ask, and I'm going to ask you, John, first. So when you sit with the Kenyan government, the ministers and all that, what are you telling? Are they, you know, I always think that they don't get it myself. I always wonder whether they worry about how inequality is because it's growing. I mean, what do you feel is the mood in the, do they understand that inequality in Kenya can derail all these plans?
Thank you very much. Thank you for the nice observations about our report and the critique there too. I think the big challenge about growth, Kenya, like other countries, is not just growth, it's the distribution. So in some sectors, even when we see phenomenal growth, like in horticulture, flower exports, we ask ourselves, does this growth permeate to the rest of society? I think it's the issue we have to deal with, the structure of the economy. Even when we talk about inequality in Kenya and maybe perhaps in other countries, we have different types of inequalities. The biggest one is income inequalities. The second one is regional inequalities. The 47 counties we talk about, they have different potentials. The other one is gender inequalities. The other one, which is manifesting itself, is inequalities in opportunities. And that's where the difference is. Does the political leadership address itself to the different forms of inequalities that we face? And I would say so. The current administration, having come on a strongly pro-youth election agenda last year in March, they are, I think, doing tooth and nail to address the issues of youth unemployment. I think we'll be discussing this on Friday. Opportunities for youth education, entrepreneurship, for gender, the women, and the associations. Now the government is committing itself to 30% of public procurement to go to youth, women, and persons with disabilities, including my own organizations. We have to report quarterly what are we doing about our procurement to address those. Then, as we'll address tomorrow, there are new training programs in entrepreneurship where the private sector organizations are involved, building new skills to match what the market requirements. I leave it there. But the issue of social cohesiveness, it's being addressed in different ways. First, it's based on how do you build trust between different groups of society. How does the rule of law encourage entrenchment of trust and dividends for maintaining trust? Thank you.
Okay, I think I will ask you another question, Joe, so that we move on. I think since the focus here is on devolution, and we say, and we think, some of us have been writing on this, on devolution, why Kenya need a devolved system for a long time. But there's also a danger in devolved system, which is the elite capture. And they could actually nullify all what we call the benefits of devolution. Now, in your evaluation, Joe, how do you evaluate the county governments? Are they on the right track? We see a lot of things in the newspaper, and they're actually going to be able to attract investors like we may have in this room, which is one of the goals of this system. What's your evaluation?
Thank you. And I might say that devolution is something that I think the government is quietly committed. However, one of the problems that has not been, clearly defined is whether this relationship is vertical or horizontal between the national government and county government. In my sense is that the way the county has taken or have evolved, they are more likely, or they seem to perceive themselves as autonomous from the national government. And what has happened is that most of them has, taken advantage of the weakness of that, cross to be able to engage more on the current expenditures instead of development. So I think while the concept is very, very good, I think the jury is still out because there are certain things, fundamental things that we are still struggling. There is also a struggle between the county government and the Senate. As we speak, one of the governors had been impeached by the Senate, and the governor has to go to the court to ask the court to define what is this relationship between the county government and the national government. So in answering your question, precisely, I think the concept is good, the government is committed, but I think there's this teething problem that I think we have to deal with as a country. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll open, but I would like Stephen to comment on, since you are now on the private sector and the investors, what is the single most problem that you hear from investors as relates to Kenya? What's the most important, so that this our colleagues here, when they go back, they can be telling the government what's the most important problem to investors in Kenya?
On one hand, companies are seeing Kenya as a strong investment destination. For instance, General Electric is making some very major investments there, and particularly in infrastructure. I think you're also seeing the consumer sector also invest. Procter & Gamble, for instance, more in Kenya, because, as this report also pointed out, the consumer sector growth is one of the largest right now in Kenya. I can't remember the exact figure, but it was something like 52%, as I recall, representing the total growth. Up against that is a consistent, understandable practice of rule of law and transparency in governance and how foreign investors are dealt with. This is not, again, unique to Kenya, but it's also it is a problem that our companies are grappling with. I think it requires a much deeper discussion because I think there's also the need to understand the cultural context in which they're working much more as well. It's not a one-sided area. Cultures operate differently. We sometimes label that as corruption. Yet I think it's not corruption quite often, but that issue does exist, but it exists in the United States as well.
Good. Thank you very much. I would like to open now to the floor. Thank you very much, all of you. We will get some questions from the floor. So I'll take like 3 questions, and then I'll have the panelists respond. And don't feel offended if I say you, because I don't know what the names. The gentleman at the back, and then Lawrence.
Hello, John Simon with Total Impact Advisors.
Oh, it's John.
Yes.
Man, I'm
good to
losing
see
my sight. Yeah.
I had a question about the role of Kenya in the regional economy. How important is regional integration to Kenya's future economic growth? And given your point that there's in fact a growing trade deficit in Kenya, is there political support for continuing regional economic growth within the country?
Thank you, John. There's a gentleman here, and then Lawrence. I can take that one too.
Hi, David Kralik with International Green Structures. I was looking at all the indexes and tables and charts. I didn't see anything on housing. And I was curious, I'd like the panel to discuss about what effect the housing deficit has on the economy and broader implications for, of course, poverty and all that.
Thanks. Lawrence? And then this gentleman at the corner. Lawrence, over there.
Thank you very much. Lawrence Freeman from the Africa Desk EAR. Some of the figures that I glanced at the report and were mentioned have also been discussed in a report that your institution, the Africa Growth Initiative, young lady delivered last year at Kenya at 50. And she showed that from Kenyatta 1 to Kenyatta 2, agricultural production dropped. Manufacturing remained the same, and the only thing that went up was finance and service industry. Isn't that exactly the danger that you don't want because of this per capita wealth question if you don't provide the physical wealth for the people in food and energy and production? The focus on the finances sector is not going to solve that problem. Some people want to make Kenya into the new Wall Street of East Africa. And compare this now to what would be the relationship to Ethiopia, which is on a track to become an energy exporter, even though they're a much poorer country to start with. So this seems to me a fundamental question that has to be dealt with if Kenya is going to actually grow in the way necessary.
Thanks. Let me take another one. The gentleman at the corner, next to the camera lady, my lady there.
Thank you. Jose Biao, I'm with FRB Realty Capital. We are a commercial real estate capital markets firm based here in D.C., arranging debt and equity capital for commercial real estate projects. We're actually looking at Sub-Saharan Africa as a new platform. The gentleman mentioned housing. I looked at the brief summary. I did not see commercial real estate or residential real estate, which is a key aspect in terms of building long-term wealth for any society. So I'd like to get your perspective maybe on the larger, in the larger file, there's a real estate section, but just the brief economic environment in terms of capital flowing into real estate. I know there's a lot of interesting things happening in Kenya right now, and I'd appreciate your perspective on that.
Okay, so we have, so I think that's very relevant. The question on housing, given the urbanization threats, are actually quite relevant. So you should answer those 2 questions from the gentleman, the last 2 gentlemen. Then Lawrence is more geared to the sort of more infrastructure and more on energy. And John's is on integration. Just quick comments on this. And Stephen, you are free to comment on these two.
Okay, let me take the role of Kenya on integration. Obviously, we are the major economy in East Africa. We are the hub as well as the gateway. So it is to our own interest to make sure that the East Africa integration works. And we have taken some steps in doing that by trying to amend our laws in compliance with some of the protocols that have been given. For instance, the protocol of the common market. We have also removed some of the travel restrictive to some of the countries, particularly Rwanda and Uganda. So strategically, I think the government is aware that if East Africa has to integrate, we have to take the lead. And I think that combined with a new policy that we are pursuing based on peace and economic diplomacy seems to provide that evidence that East Africa is important and is important to us, and we are getting dividend from that. I think most of the farms that are relocating to Africa, GE is a case in point. We have some other international organizations that have really come to Nairobi as their headquarters. So again, this is an indication that China is another a key player, that whoever wanna take advantage or exploit network within the East Africa, Kenya is the right place. Thank you.
So that we get another round.
Thank you for the questions. I'll be very brief. Housing. We have not reported it in this particular edition, but last year's edition, which was covering what we call cost of living in Kenya, extensively covered the housing sector, whereby, for example, we revealed that in terms of the hierarchy of household expenditure, food was number one in terms of expenses. Number two was housing. Number three was transport. Number four was school fees. So in terms of how households spend their money. So already the private sector in Kenya, they have identified real estate and stock markets as investment areas of very high returns. Indeed, going by the UN standards, nobody should spend more than 28% of their salary on housing costs. So the government is putting a lot of emphasis, and if you come to many urban centers, especially with now devolved county governments, private individuals are building houses for rentals, although it depends how competitiveness, whether it's rentals or what. Second, declining agriculture. I will be very brief. In terms of the theory that we have borrowed, they say as countries develop, the relative contribution of agriculture to GDP has to decrease, although the total value of agriculture can continue increasing. So it is desirable that agriculture's relative contribution to GDP declines. And the emphasis in agriculture now, what the government has done on what we call Kenya's Vision 2030, is to make the agricultural sector a business-like enterprise. There are two quick challenges there. One, the youth don't want to be involved anymore in agriculture. It's not interesting. So you face an aging population involved in farming. Three, many of the people are moving away from the rural areas. So there are opportunities for land to expand, and therefore people can commercialize, modernize the agriculture, have tractors, have modern farming methods. So agriculture is a future. but this contribution to the economy, as relative to others, must decrease.
I wanted to stay out of it, but let me step into it. I think all these issues are far more complex. The housing issue is also, it's an issue throughout Africa, frankly. So in some ways connected to the land ownership issue, and in some ways connected to the issue of rent, which is a little different in historically in different parts of different African countries, but it represents a great business opportunity, and it's also badly needed in terms of human development. But it's far more complex than simply let's build some houses, particularly culturally. The devolution issue, I think, I would agree that it's a great idea, and I think it potentially empowers people, which the key is how well you use power, using power wisely, and how well you communicate. And we've had similar problems. We just call the issue states' rights in between central government and the individual states. So again, it's not unique historically, but it is unique to each country in a different way. And I also say that another major issue still, but it's less so in Kenya than many other countries, is the lack of infrastructure that needs to be built throughout. And China is helping in some ways, and in other ways there's much, much more that is needed, particularly in IT, and that comes back to capacity building again.
Thanks. I think Stephen did touch on a question related to what Lawrence was interested in, particularly connecting Ethiopia and the huge investments that the country is making on infrastructure. I think Kenya is doing quite a bit of that now. It has really changed with quite a bit of focus on infrastructure. I think, again, I'm not an author of this report, and I have not looked at it, but I would maybe say they probably didn't totally exclude housing. I would assume it's under construction. I think they lumped everything under construction. Okay, let me take a few quick questions. I'll start with these two ladies, quick, then the gentleman and the lady up back there. If you can make them short, we can, at least we get answers because we have very few minutes.
Okay. Jumbo, my name is Kelly Page Jabrell. I'm a consultant, broker, and professor for international business, and representing investors as well. And so I want to ask more specific questions in terms of investment. I understand the real estate investment, agriculture, et cetera. But what might be some of the investment opportunities in the $100 to $300 million range related to maybe tourism or factory development or that housing issue that was raised, et cetera? And I think for me specifically is when we talk about investors in the room, just helping that linkage for investors to those actual opportunities with the emphasis of counties as well. I know that might be something as well.
I am Marilyn Sifokla, and I'm the president of the Women Ambassadors Foundation, and I'm also with Ideas Inc. You mentioned earlier in the report that about 30% of procurement will be devoted to women, the disabled, and also the youth. Yes. And my question is, why such a low number, particularly with regards to women, since women represent more than 51% of the population, and also since there is such a vibrant entrepreneurship spirit among women in Kenya? Why such a low number for Kenyan women?
The gentleman at the back and the lady at the, yeah.
Thank you very much. Aloysius Odu from the World Bank, just one of your neighbors here. Like Stephen said, I'd like to congratulate Joseph and the authors of this report, because it goes to show for many investors here and all of us that Africa has continued to come a long way. I think we have ridden on a couple of tailwinds, the commodity prices, and some of the macro stability that have arisen out of reforms across the continent. So these are all good. For the authors of the report, I'm really looking forward to reading it. And I've just wondered, because looking at the summary, I think there are some really challenging issues facing Kenya right now. We talked about how far the country has come, and which is evident, but harnessing the economic stability that enabled Kenya, like many African countries, to withstand the shock of 2008, 2009. I think it would have been good to have a little bit more of what the country is doing to reap the development dividends of the policies that have been in place since the 80s. The second is infrastructure. I know it's listed, and Stephen mentioned that this is important, but in Kenya, actually, if you think back to independence, compared to South Korea, Japan, all these countries were really no match for Kenya. Kenya was ahead. So when you think of consumption of electricity at 155 kilowatts compared to 4,000 in South Africa, I just wonder whether the report has really touched the tip of the iceberg in terms of challenges for Kenya. The second is integration, which was raised earlier, which makes a lot of sense for the continent. Now, Kenya are the epicenter of regionalism in East Africa, Southern Africa, and the heart of Africa, the center. The 2008 post-election crisis showed very clearly how when Kenya stopped, almost 15 countries in the region stopped. The question is Kenya and its leaders prepared to play the role that, say, Jean Monnet played to forge ahead with European integration of the type we know today? Because it's okay to say integration is important, but I just wondered whether the responsibilities on Kenya, whether the leadership has recognized that there's just so much on your shoulders. And the final one, and I think we're out of time, is the youth. The youth was mentioned, and Joseph projected population rising from 42% to 66% by 2030. And we know that the youth constitutes a giant share of this bulge. And they will create future demands, of course. But that Stephen mentioned, I just wondered whether the authors can say a little bit more, because that's quite worrisome. That's quite worrisome. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's quick, I promise. Hi, I'm Claire Allenson. I'm with Eurasia Group. I cover East Africa. We're a political risk consulting firm. And the question is simple on the wage bill that you highlighted rightly at the 50% mark, looking a little worrying. I was wondering if you could just comment further on policy priorities to bring that down, not just for the MPs in the Senate, but also for parastatals and ministry consolidation that has occurred, and where you can see ways for policies to bring that wage bill down. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Can we start, Joe? Just answer just 1 minute so that we are not cut off.
All right, let me deal with the question that was raised about the procurement. I think you're absolutely right, but I think this 30% is precisely for the same issue you have raised. With our new constitution, what has happened is we have created these vertical accountability that never used to be there before. So women, people understand, or the government understand, they're a critical player. And so consequently, the 30% is coming as a realization that women are also a critical force. But also, mind you, they are not also excluded from the 70%. Then on the investment opportunities, energy is one of them. I think manufacturing is a critical place. We keep on talking this youth and employment, and the only critical sector that really has to play this major role is manufacturing. And the government seems to be very receptive on those areas. On the wage bill, I think there are some few things that the government has really taken in place. There is already an audit that have been directed by the president to ensure that you don't have these ghost workers within the civil service. Thank you.
Just a minute, sorry for cutting you. I think webcast will be off in a minute.
Because the webcast is going to be off, I'll say we can continue the discussion on investment areas. Others are housing estates, export marketing, and export processing. We're building social capital as a country, as a nation, learning from our past failures to forge forward.
Okay, on agriculture is the one I would like to just address really briefly. I think that the flight away from farms is not good. I think that what you're creating is a greater urbanization, which is a problem. And I think that we need to look at ways in which the rural area becomes far more attractive. CCA is working with MIT and Harvard and Ghana to create an agribusiness knowledge center to address some of this, although that's only one small step. But I think it's important, particularly if you're going to the county governments, then that's going to be more and more critical to rather than draw down from the populations of county governments of support, is to find ways in which agriculture is strengthened, not weakened.
Okay, so maybe the final word now that time is coming out, running out. Just a brief point. I think for the current Kenyan leadership, one thing I know they seem to understand very well is regional integration. The president actually spits numbers straight about intra-Africa trade, how much we would benefit. And the team seems to understand that Kenya is really going to benefit most for a smoothly running East African community. So I think that will be sustained, and it seems like the president seems to be very focused on the regional integration question. There are obviously problems within East Africa. Many of you may know that we were ahead of the European Union in the 1960s. We had an East Africa community that was running. We had the East African Airways, we had the East African Railways and Harbors, post and telecommunication. We were very far ahead. But then, of course, it broke down. Then the main issue was, of course, differences in institutions. You had Idi Amin in one side, you had Nyerere on the other side, you had Kenyatta, the capitalist, and a socialist there and there. So it didn't work. But there was always a feeling by Tanzania that Kenya was the one benefiting. And I think one of the real issues that for Kenya needs to do in managing is to make sure Tanzania remains, or it feels that it will benefit from the integration, because there is a tendency for Tanzania to sort of slow down the process. So I think that I would say I'm getting a notice to shut up. Thank you very much once again. I think we can follow up, but I can tell you, particularly those interested in investment, not because I'm a Kenyan. I actually speak for Africa, not Kenya, but that's a good praise, and I think people should give it a second thought, particularly now. Thank you very much, all of you.